Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I am back with another law video for you and I'm going to be going through 13 tips to write a first class law essay. I have just finished my first year of law at the University of Exeter and I managed to secure a first. I was going to do how to write a first class law essay all in one video, but as I've been making notes about it and thinking about it quite a lot, I actually have a lot to say about this. So I'm going to split it up into a few videos. So I'm going to do one after this of like step by step how to write a first class law essay. So this is going to be quick tips of how you can really improve and how you can write good essays. So essays are massively my favourite part of the course. It's not all of the course, you also have to write problem questions, but you can sort of choose whether to answer essay questions or problem questions, and I definitely prefer essay questions. I still did well in the problem questions, but I absolutely love writing essays. I got quite far into a first. I managed to get a first overall in first year, but I got quite far into a first. I got like a 75 for my CNA exam, which is constitutional law, and also got 74 for the paper that I wrote for constitutional, and then I got very high 2-1s and also I think some firsts in the rest of my modules. So have a look at my reaction to my law results if you want to have a look at that video. I go a bit more into depth of what I got in there, but there will be more of where this video is coming from, but I just thought I'd split it down to make it less of a massive task and less sort of overwhelming. So if you enjoy it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for future law content to support the channel. I am going to be talking with reference to the essays that you will be set throughout the year. So you will take them away, you'll get an essay question and you'll have a little bit of time to do reading for the topic and then plan and write your essay. A lot of these things will also apply in the exam format because you will still need to be using academic commentary and case law and so on in your exam, but you won't have as long to access it. So when I'm talking about journals, scholars' articles and all of that, I am talking about when you have a take-home essay to write, but a lot of the other stuff that I talk about will also be relevant to exams. So the structure and all of those sorts of bits that I'm speaking about, that will also be relevant in the exam. But that's just for your reference so you know what I'm talking about when I speak about scholars' articles and journals and so on. If you don't already know, which I didn't when I started law, this is basically you'll just do reading of academics who comment on the law, they'll write papers on the law, and this is how you sort of build your argument. Like I will read a lot of these different articles, a lot of these papers that academics and scholars have written before I write my essays, and they are basically like integral to making your essay. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about this. And I'm thinking of doing a whole video on how to find and use your sources as well. I think it's more of a niche video than the other law videos I'm doing, but it's something that I definitely would like to have known. And also you will be reading case law. If you don't already know this, the judgments will be written, and we use a platform called Westlaw, which I'm pretty sure most universities will use, if not all of them, and the judgments are stored on there. The judge will write a judgment on a certain case and it can be really quite long. So you're reading these judgments and including them in your essays. That's just a brief overview of the kind of material that you'll be engaging with when you're writing an essay. And in the exam, obviously, you might have access to your notes depending on the module, but you won't have as much time. And in some of the exams, for example my contract exam, if it had been how it's supposed to be, I would have had to commit all of those sorts of scholars' opinions and academic opinions to memory. So bear that in mind. So let's get started. Tip number 1 might seem a bit counterintuitive, or you might already not do this, which is don't write your intro first. So you won't know exactly what your argument's going to be probably until you've written it. Obviously you should form a structure and everything, but you should write a strong introduction after you've written the main body of the essay, because you will know what you've argued and you'll be able to set that out really clearly in your introduction. So in your introduction you should be responding to the question, breaking it down and seeing what it's actually asking you, and then writing through how you're going to answer it, what your argument is and how you're going to prove that, so the examiner knows exactly how you're going to answer it. So tip number 2 leading on from that is use your your introduction and your conclusion to frame your argument and set it out. So you set it out in your introduction, say how you're going to prove your point or how you're going to prove how you're responding to the question, and then you'll be coming full circle and ending on a really strong conclusion. Tip number 3 is something I didn't learn until quite late on in the year. I think a lot of people might already know this. Use Command F to find quotes in Westlaw, so you can be reading cases, in PDF, so you could be reading a journal or an article, in Word documents, so you can be searching for a quote that you already have or a word that you remember, or something that you are looking for. So you could be looking for example, prerogative powers. So you know that you're going to be writing a paragraph about prerogative powers, so you then know that you need to be searching for this in the papers that you're reading. So you can literally Command F, put prerogative powers in, and it will bring up all the bits in the article that it's been mentioned, so you can read really important parts before you read the entire article, and you can decide if it's an article that you want to read in its entirety or if you can just pick out that bit and see what their argument was. But it's really, really useful to be able to find your quotes and find really important parts in anything that you're reading for the essay. Tip number 4 is have a document for your notes and quotes. So I would say split these up into points, so you'll know roughly what you're going to be doing by planning your essay, and then split it up by colour coding your quotes and your notes in, say, 3 different colours if you've got 3 different paragraphs. That will be really helpful when you come to writing your essay. You'll be able to see which bits and which points you're going to be including in each paragraph. And this also means that you've got everything in one place. So if you've copied and pasted all the notes that you think are important, I did have really, really long notes for anything that I was going to write at home. So I would have maybe even 20 pages of quotes and notes and stuff that I've copied and pasted, or notes that I've written about what I've read before I would write the essay. And this would just mean that everything's in the document, so you don't have to keep flicking between so many different papers and tabs and journals and judgments that you've got open, because they'll all be compiled in one document. And it might be quite a hefty document, but it means you don't have to keep going back and finding what you read, because quite often you'll have read a lot of different documents and it can be really hard to remember where you found the thing that you've just read from. So if you put the link next to where you found it from, so you can always go back, or just copy and paste all the quotes and say exactly where you got them from, that will save you a lot of time. Number 5 is use headings where appropriate. So this might not be for everyone, but I think it's quite helpful. If you read a lot of journals as well, they'll do this. So when scholars are writing articles, they'll split it up into intro, and then they'll name all their sort of paragraphs, or they'll be longer than paragraphs if you're reading a journal article, but they'll name them depending on what topic each one of them is covering in relation to the question or the thing that the paper is answering. And I think that's a really useful format to use, because in your intro you can say, I'm going to be arguing this point, and I'm going to be arguing it with reference to heading 1, heading 2 and heading 3, and then your marker can see exactly where you're arguing each of those things with reference to what and your conclusion, and it just breaks up really nicely, and it shows your marker exactly what you're picking out and what you're going to speak about. Number 6 is acknowledge counter arguments, and either use these to strengthen your argument by explaining why you don't think they're convincing, or explain why your argument is more convincing than this. It's not useful to pretend that there aren't any counter arguments, but at the same time you don't have to say, for example, in A levels you used to have to do a paragraph of where you would say a counter argument, or do a whole paragraph to a against paragraph. You don't have to do that. It will really strengthen your argument if you do acknowledge counter arguments and don't just go sort of one way and just ignore everything to the contrary of what you're arguing. It's really helpful to acknowledge them and just explain why you think your point's more convincing, because that will strengthen your argument so much, and it will show the marker that you've also read different things and you see why other people might disagree with you, and I think this will help you in going to get those higher marks. Number 7 is don't just describe case law, analyse it. So you don't just want to describe which way the judges ruled in this case and what they said and be picking out quotes from their judgment, because that's really important to say what the ruling was in certain cases and be picking out quotes. But you don't just want to be stating the law, you want to be analysing it, saying what this means for the future, what the judges are saying, what precedent this sets, not just stating the law. So this is something that I did in one of my first essays, and then in the second essay I learned not to do that. because that was one of my feedbacks, and to really sort of pick apart what was being said and what the implications of this ruling were, not just stating what the ruling was. Number 8 is make sure you are answering the question. So when you get a question, it might be a really simple question like, to what extent do you agree with this statement, or what are the implications of this? And it can be quite easy to see what the question is asking you, and then you can take that into your introduction and weave it through your paragraphs and your whole essay and be answering that question the whole way through. There are some more questions where you might have to break it up and see what the question's asking, but make sure you're answering the question all through the essay, and this will be one of the marking criteria for how well you do and how you get marks, is how well you're answering the question. So you need to make sure you're answering the question. So with regards to knowing how to answer the question and approaches to take towards answering the question, I would say first go through your lecture notes, your seminar questions, and all the materials you've been given in that respect, and look at what little questions you would have in your seminars. So there might be little single line questions that sort of challenge you to think about what, say, like section 74 of the Sexual Offences Act means, and that will give you a little indicator and a way that you can think about it, which your lecturer has given you. So for example, intoxicated consent. In our seminar questions, there was a question about the Sexual Offences Act with intoxicated consent creates a hierarchy of harm. So that gives you an insight into what you can be thinking about if you get an essay question on that. So I find seminar materials always really helpful because your lecturers are trying to prompt you into thinking, you're critically analysing, and it will give you little perspectives of how you might approach a question about that material. And the same in your sort of lectures and lecture notes, your lecturer will often sort of offer a bit of analysis on a certain thing, so you'll probably have that in your lecture notes. So just have a quick look to see if you can find any of that, and that will really prompt you on ways that you can be thinking about how you can approach the question, how you can be looking from different perspectives at the question from your seminar and lecture notes and questions. Number 10 is also for sources. So when you're looking for like journal articles, scholar articles and things like that, look at the reading list that you're provided. You will be provided a reading list with articles, extra reading for each of the topics. So if you get given a paper, go to the topic in your extra reading and your reading lists, and you will find papers that the lecturer thinks are suitable for that. So that's a really good place to start, because obviously the lecturer has a really good idea of what useful papers will be, and then you can go on from there and either footnote hop, which is just looking at their footnotes and what sources they've used in that article that you're reading, and then going on to read that article, or you can search for your sources in other ways. Number 11 leads on from this, which is use lots of academic commentary to strengthen your argument. Don't just pop it in, respond to it, analyse it, and see if you think it's convincing, if you think part of it's convincing but another part would be better if you rephrased it this way. For example, one way in which I've sort of said I agree with this person to this extent, but I think a slightly less radical approach is more convincing, was in my constitutional essay, and I'll just read a little bit of that now. So I've put, Vernon Bogdanor suggests just as joining the EU fundamentally changed the UK constitution, Brexit could do the same by exposing the nakedness of our uncodified arrangements and prove a catalyst for a written constitution. I would suggest a less radical approach would be adopted. Certainly, Brexit adds to calls for greater legislation to protect our constitution, particularly in areas that have been exposed to have weaknesses throughout the process, but further judicial intervention contributing to the case-by-case evolution of our constitution may also be required to maintain a sufficiently flexible, resettled post-Brexit constitution. So I've sort of said this person suggests this, and I agree to this extent, but I think a more convincing way of looking at this is this. I think that's a really good way to engage with academic commentary. Number 12 is make your essay cohesive. So don't just throw in different paragraphs. Make sure you're linking them together and telling a story with your sort of essay, really building upon what you've said before and linking all your paragraphs together to make your argument seem really cohesive, and so it sort of flows and really builds on your argument to your conclusion. And number 13 is the final tip, which is have a strong conclusion. This is what the mark will finish on, and this is what they'll remember and take away from the essay. So really reiterate your argument, and then I like to end on sort of like a little punchy line at the ending, like a strong sentence at the end. But obviously don't just throw in something wild for the sake of it being punchy. Like, make sure it's actually reiterating or backing up what you've proved throughout your essay. So for example, in one of my constitutional exam essays, final sentence I wrote for one of my essays was, where the constitution is repeatedly threatened by their use, sufficient evidence is raised that reform is needed. I mean, I don't think that's the strongest, but I do think it's important to have sort of like a strong ending. So another one that I got a first in was my criminal paper, which was, the law has previously changed ahead of social attitudes, and policy change can lead to positive attitude change. So yeah, really reflecting on what you've said throughout the essay and trying to end on something that reinforces all that you've built up in the essay. So that is the end of my 13 tips, and I will be doing more videos on this. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope it's been helpful. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I will see you in the next video.